Okay, so the way the model is set up is we've got white and black, and that doesn't mean anything other than you have two different groups. And they're interacting on the Grand Canyon. So they interact with the landscape, and then they interact with each other. And we're going to measure here how many of them are sedentary and how much wealth they accumulate. Sedentary because some of the native groups were sedentary, others were nomadic. And then language to see how they're switching between a native language and Spanish. What is the predominance of the language? So what we see here is from 0, predominantly Spanish, to 1, predominantly native. And as they're mixing, we're seeing a change in the language component. Right? We're also seeing that the landscape is driving them into certain areas, which makes sense because they're in the Grand Canyon, so they're probably going to the lower valleys anyway. And then some of the groups are remaining isolated. And as they interact, what's happening here, the white, hopefully, and the black will eventually change color, showing some sort of language change. And I think it has to run for quite a while in order for us to see recognizable change in the language patterns. So the next step of the model is to add religion, to add some sort of political administrative feature, and perhaps gender, some sort of reproductive cycle, some sort of memory cycle, and to get a better map of the area, because that's the Grand Canyon, not Santa Fe, so that we have a better idea how it all comes together, and hopefully to see some change or not. To find out what it is to be mestizo. What are those characteristics? That's better. Yes. Yes, sir.
So how do you interact with the landscape? I figured out where the bottom of the Grand Canyon is, but how is that done in the model?
In the model, what's happening is they're looking at, the individual actors are looking at the patches themselves, and each patch has some sort of wealth factor, a utility factor, and they look at it and say, if I move there, will that make me better off or worse off?
And that roughly corresponds to the topological.
Yes, exactly. Right, so they would naturally tend down to the lower areas. Yes, okay. And then there's looking at each other and saying, okay, you speak Spanish, I need to increase my wealth, I'm indigenous, does it benefit me to trade with you and learn your language? Does that improve my position?
Is that where the prisoner's dilemma model fits in for each agent?
Yes. We haven't quite got there yet, but that's one of the permutations, yes, is to say this is the decision. Do I interact with you? If I do, what's the benefit? Yes.
Questions?
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering, how do you, where are you gleaning this information? So say, like, do you have, that you know that a family of, say, 5 members moved from one area to the other? Is that kind of how you're getting the individual kind of, data points and then kind of mapping that they moved from one area to another? And how are you getting this kind of information?
Okay, right now, what this model is completely randomized. So we're populating the region with just randomized agents.
Okay.
What I'm hoping to do is to have more specific locations in terms of where the pueblos actually were on the landscape, and then on top of that to bring in the movement of Spanish and the families so that I can then see if that what that interaction does. But right now they're just randomly placed on the landscape.
The overall goal is to increase wealth.
For the moment, yes.
For each agent or collectively?
For each agent right now. But what happens is they tend to agglomerate in certain areas because their wealth is also a function of, is everybody else around me also improving their wealth? In which case I want to attach to someone that's also improving their wealth.
So in this simulation here, the total wealth eventually starts going down again?
Yes, because what's happening is as they become more sedentary, more urbanized, you have to spread the wealth over more individuals. So that's why you're going to see the decline in the wealth factor.
All right.
Yes. So what we don't have is, you know, reproduction and that sort of thing to see. That kind of makes sense as well because it's a relatively poor area to begin with, so if you begin to urbanize, you're gonna see that wealth curve drop.
So the ultimate goal then is to compare the simulation, sort of an abstract simulation, with the results that you actually get when you draw from the data and you run a sort of gaming thing with the actual actors, gleaning as much as you can from the documents?
Right, what I'm hoping to do is, I haven't yet found, but I'm hoping that there are already maps of cultural patterns of the time period. So if we have the maps of the cultural patterns, then can I reproduce that particular map using something similar to this? Because then I can then go in and look at the details and say this must have been the cultural mix that produced that pattern. And then from there I can make the statement or not, as the case may be, or the Borderlands as we understand them, this is the cultural mix that they constitute. Then we can take another step back and say, is that the way it's represented in the material that we've been looking at? What is that story? So there's kind of several steps. What I'm hoping is that I can get a hold of a map in the same way that the Anasazi model had. They had a map already generated, so they tried to replicate the map. It may be that I can't, and so I have to generate a map and hope that, you know, someone else, you know, verifies or not in the case of me.
One of the, like, there are some, I didn't get the sites for the literature on boundaries, like state boundaries and borderlands thing, but I have a couple
Yes.
ideas.
Okay, yes. I only put up a couple of the more recent things because there are a number of writers that have been writing about the U.S. borderlands and the boundary issues there. What I try to do is look a little bit further than that literature and you know, especially the colonial literature, to see what they were writing, what their notions were of boundaries, and besides the contemporary geographers.